Good morning, afternoon, or evening, whichever it is where you are. I'm Ronnie Lipschitz, stuck in sunny California, where it is not always sunny. I'd hoped to visit Granada, which I last saw almost 50 years ago, and speak to you live, but alas, that won't happen because I don't want to risk an extended stay in an airplane. In this presentation, I will talk about relationality as an essential element of sustainability and a sustainable world. My argument is that there is no such thing as the individual. Not until we recognize and practice this insight will we be able to engage in the social actions that are so necessary to a sustainable world. So let me begin. The vast majority of Northern and capitalist beliefs and practices misconstrue the nature of the individual. The commonly shared assumption in these worldviews is that individuals as agents make decisions, act on the basis of some type of mental calculation about self-interest, and acting together can change the world. As a result, sustainability can be achieved through the aggregated decisions and actions of autonomous individuals. My proposition is that there is no such thing as the individual. The so-called individual in capitalist society does not spring up like the proverbial mushroom after the rains. Instead, like a mushroom and its mycelial connections, the individuals is an effect of relationships among things in the world, and our subjectivities and identities arise from those relationships and not from individual choice and agency. Although I want to make clear that this is not the same as Deleuze and Guattari's rhizomes as described in A Thousand Plateaus. The result of these relationships is expressed through affect. The implications of such affect for achieving a sustainable world are significant and manifold, even if it is not so easy to put this notion into words or practice. As I will suggest, however, there are worldviews that recognize the centrality of relationality in the world and its role in the sustainability of both nature and culture. My presentation proceeds in 4 parts. First, what do I mean by affect and why does that matter? Second, how did an individualist ontology come to dominate our places in the world? And why is that ontology deeply flawed, if not completely incorrect? Third, how does a worldview based in a relational affect upend the ways in which we behave toward and engage with nature? And fourth, what are the implications of this affect for sustainability? The alternative title of my paper and presentation is With What Affect? I use the term affect as articulated by Christian von Steve, who describes it as having little to do with feelings and emotions, but rather is part of an ontology that centers on processes, relations, and the effects that bodies have on one another. This ontology, he writes, is characterized by challenging the central position of human beings in most of Western social thought, by the notion that agency should not be understood as intentional action, but rather as efficacy that is distributed across assemblages of humans and non-humans, and by the idea that the social and political are constituted and fueled by non-conscious and bodily affect. Now, there's a connection between affect and worldview. Annick and Nicholas Headland DeWitt define worldviews as inescapable overarching systems of meaning and meaning-making that, to a substantial extent, inform how we interpret and act and co-create reality. They are complex constellations of epistemic capacities, ontological presuppositions, and ethical and aesthetic values that converge to dynamically organize a synthetic apprehension of the world. These are both pretty dense definitions, but in brief, affect is a person's sense of being in the world, which has been constituted in past and present by relations among things in culture and nature: people, plants, animals, landscapes, waterscapes, inanimate things, the hammer and the rock, and so on. But these are abstractions, and we do not have relationships with abstract things. Our relationships are with material entities and things with whom we have direct, concrete connections that are meaningful individually and socially, materially and cognitively. Conventional theories and philosophies of ecological sustainability and social change begin with cognition rather than practice. Almost all focus on changing people's beliefs and worldviews. Almost all are individualist. These philosophies assume that individuals have power, they understand causality, and can act to change their behavior in the world. Acting individually, they can change their orientations, worldviews, and behaviors, and in aggregate, they can transform the structural systems that drive them to behave in individualist fashion. This approach is commonly applied to sustainability. All that is necessary is to inform individuals of the truth. They will change their behaviors, and larger change will take place across society. Even social movement theories fall prey to this individualist ontology. Most attribute the cognitive mobilization of individuals by immediate ideas and interests. Those individuals then come together in pursuit of collective instrumental goals. Structures become the things to be transformed through the effect of aggregated action on those by those who are most responsible for maintaining the structures. So how did we get here? Why does individualism have such a powerful hold over us? From where did it come? This is a long story, and I don't pretend to know or understand all of it. I provide more detail in my paper. In brief, however, individualism is rooted in the bestowal of grace on and salvation for the individual member of the Catholic congregation. In Protestantism, capitalism, and science, the individual becomes the agent of salvation, success, research, agency, and history. And nor can we forget the central role of private property in all of this ontology and epistemology. Thomas Hobbes and his 17th century associates bear major responsibility for what C.B. Macpherson has called possessive individualism. That is, everything exists in relation to who owns it. They provided arguments about the critical role of private property and individual ownership in the constitution of what was then the new liberal state. In the 19th and 20th centuries, these theories of personal property were extended to cover the body through what we call civil and human rights. We own ourselves, and we seek to extend such rights to nature, recreating the individualist basis of our legal systems. My argument, however, is that there is no such thing as the individual. First, there is no me without we. Second, there is no I without the rest of the world. Individual identity is a phenomenological result of material relationships among people and things, and not a product of the mind alone. The individual is constituted as an entity through materiality, practice, and relationships with things, nature, and people. These are, of course, essential to both individual and collective survival, but they are also instruments of socialization into a particular worldview and affect. An example of the affect of sustainability appears in the well-known Native American ontology of family. One's family includes not only kin, but also entities in nature. Kin relationships are central to individual identity and place in the social group. Without them, the individual is rootless and alienated, with results that are much like the impacts ascribed to modernity. Resistance to individualist ontology and epistemology have been visible in the repeated attempts to create socialist, collective, and communist communities. Here I exclude the forced collectivization of peasants by communist states. But such communal efforts frequently dissolve under the reemergence of individualism and external pressures to conform. It is very difficult to remain poor when surrounded by the rich, as demonstrated by the history of Israel's kibbutzim, which began poor and are now quite wealthy. In recent decades, there has been a relational term in some academic research, especially in sociology and psychology. This term focuses on the role of relationships in organizing society and constructing individuals. One example is Bruno Latour's actor network theory, or ANT, which engages with the agential effects of actants on an individual's behavior. Actants cover a wide territory. An example would be how a car coming toward you would lead you to jump out of the way. The car is the actant in this causal relationship. So the admonition to look both ways before you cross instills a shared affect regarding the street as a risky place. We practice caution, are required to stay within the zebra crossing, and to obey the walk, don't walk signals. And we may be cited if we deviate from these rules and restrictions. We hear about car crashes, injuries, and deaths all the time. And if we are good, we keep an eye out for pedestrians and bikes at all times. Heidegger's Dasein might sound like an example of relationality. As I understand the concept, being in the world is constituted by things that have specific epistemic significance in an individual's life. One example he provides is the hammer, which, in the hands of the hammerer, facilitates a hammering that is intelligible only with respect to that which is being hammered. For the carpenter, this relationship fuses hammer to hand, but only when hammering is happening. Otherwise, the hammer is only present to hand at best. The relationship is fleeting or sustained only during work hours. But the hammer is, on the other hand, always in the carpenter's mind. Let me give a specific example of the affect of which I am speaking. Many people love birds. They watch birds, feed birds, protect birds, and even need birds. We may argue that birds are essential for the survival of ecosystems and have value for human civilization. But this does not really describe our relationship to birds or how bird watchers come to be. So here's my fictional case. I live with a cockatiel, a roommate, so to speak. This relationship does not extend to the abstract category of all cockatiels in the world. Note that even though it is my bird, I do not treat it as property with pecuniary value. I talk with the bird as a subject of respect. Whether the bird has rights is not of concern here. Our relationship, if nurtured, co-constitutes both the bird and me in an ersatz family. I would no more do harm to the bird than I would to members of my family. And in real life, the bird's disappearance was experienced as though it was a family member. I am also well disposed to all other cockatiels, even now, and even though I don't know any of them personally, but I don't go around seeking to raise others' cockatiel consciousness, as it were. So this is the affect that I seek to describe and instill based on a worldview that you and I are not autonomous monads, but effects of relationships among things, including people, animals, plants, rivers, and so on. I believe that human societies must cultivate such an affect to become sustainable. This affect does not engage directly with nature-culture binaries or biocentric and anthropocentric views as categories. It is not about spirituality or knowledge. And it is not about I and thou or mum and tum. It is about us, which includes the totality of material things and relationships among them across space and time. So how do we get there? Changing the world is a daunting task. Everyone wants to change the world. No one knows how. It changes nonetheless, but who or what is in control? Who or what decides? Rather than charting a global plan, where you have to ask who's in charge and who decides, perhaps it makes more sense to chart local plans to create affects of sustainability where we live, work, and play. This means more than slogans, demonstrations, newsletters, and speeches. It means getting one's hands dirty. It means never forgetting the critical importance of relationships with things, with others, with trees, cougars, streams, hawks, and herons, with the earth. If we have the time, we can change the world. Thank you for watching. You can find copies of my paper, this PowerPoint, and the script on the presentations page for my presentation.